When the Virginia governor found himself embroiled in controversy over insensitive comments about abortion, and then later controversial photos were found of that same governor wearing blackface to a party, a firestorm of national protest ensued. One woman, more than any other in Virginia, is the voice and face for the pro-family movement in the Old Dominion. How would she help the Christians who look to her for direction respond with appropriate outrage while at the same time exhibiting kindness and self-control? On today's State of Independence, we'll go to Richmond and speak to a leader who often finds herself in the center of storms, not of her own making. Stay tuned. Her name is Victoria Cobb. Sorry, Victoria. In Virginia, she's been the face and often the leading voice for traditional values like the right to life, marriage, and family issues, and a host of other flashpoints in the cultural debate. She's also a wife and mom, so that means she doesn't always relish being on the front page, especially when the issues are controversial. She's been a confidant to governors and legislators, advising them, answering questions about how her constituents will react one way or the other. But then she does something that isn't always easy. She holds them to account, sometimes in private, other times on the evening news or on talk radio. We'll meet Victoria and ask her where she's decided as a follower of Christ to draw the lines. But first, watch this.
Google Victoria Cobb and you'll see why she's one of the most sought-after public policy voices in Virginia. She calls herself a modern feminist, but challenges detractors to consider that feminism should include the right to be pro-life and choose family and professional careers. She's been a voice for traditional family, but has consistently spoken up for a public square where diverse opinions are heard and considered. Every election year, Victoria's organization, the Virginia Family Foundation, puts 1 million voter guides into the hands of voters, forcing candidates to state their views on issues that some would rather not disclose. But how do you maintain Christian grace and civility in a world increasingly divided and often hostile to those views? How do you stay on the front lines of some of the biggest public policy debates while promoting the highest ideals of statesmanship? And is it possible to be decisive but not divisive?
Victoria, welcome to State of Independence and welcome back to your home state of Pennsylvania. You're from Media, PA, just a stone's throw from where we sit right now.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's always great to connect with Pennsylvania in any way.
How'd you get below the Mason-Dixon line? I mean, when I worked in the White House, I lived in Virginia, Northern Virginia, but how'd you get to Virginia?
I did it by way of University of Richmond, so my college, and then I married a Southern boy, and so we sort of find ourselves kind of squarely in the middle between the North and the South, and it seems to work for us.
So how did you get involved in politics? Was this something that you thought, like when you were a teenager or even a college student, did you think that this is where you were going to be headed and end up?
Amazingly, I had a grandmother who was just passionate about her faith and passionate about politics. Her shelves were lined with either political books or D. James Kennedy sermons. And so that was the model that I had, and I fell in love with it. And actually, it's a very odd situation, but I would say I had the call. I believe I'm called to what I'm doing. And I actually had the call, not specifically narrowed down, but to the life issue. Actually started in the 6th grade. I got passionate about abortion really young and wanted to be on the front lines. I went to a K-12 Christian school, so we actually talked about the cultural issues, and I instantly knew the injustice. I instantly saw how awful this was. And it's funny, as a mom, even sharing the issue of life with my own children, as they've gotten to the age where it's appropriate to have that conversation, it is a shocking thing to think about a legal practice of allowing someone to take their own child's life. And so for me, that's kind of, I just never looked back. Now, God narrowed that and said where to go and how to do it over time. But yeah, it was an early call and an early passion.
So tell me, you, like the rest of us, you see what looks like a pretty significant divide in the country. Where do you think we're headed as a country? I mean, what do you see on the horizon?
This is tough because I'm not naive enough to say that there's not a big divide. There really is a large divide, but I'll caption it with this. It is exacerbated by a media who just simply loves to draw on the conflict. So yes, there are two really large competing worldviews. One says that human beings are essentially flawed through all of time, but yet did something despite their flaws that was pretty exceptional with America, and that we actually have been a remarkable nation despite our flaws for hundreds of years, and that we're working to correct our wrongs. We want to fix the issues of racism and abortion. And then we also believe that we want to sort of double down on those first freedoms, like freedom of speech and association and freedom of our faith to exercise our religion. But there's another worldview that sees things differently, and they see things in a way that looks at history and says it was all flawed, and that in fact, really this moment in the present, we're unusually enlightened, and that we kind of need to scrap all of our history and rewrite all of our institutions. And that's family, government, religion itself. And so those are dramatically different views. And instead of sort of doubling down on our first freedoms, I would say there's some other values that are held in higher esteem by this other worldview, things like equality of outcome, or making sure that the public square is naked of all faith. And really, unfortunately, now there's that worldview says, let's reinterpret our first freedoms to more narrowly to achieve those objectives. So there are very different worldviews, and they do tend to clash. This isn't simply dancing around the edges of small public policy differences. They are fairly major, but I would say this, the old expression with the media, if it bleeds, it leads, right? They like the conflict, they dwell on the conflict, and they unfortunately direct us to unnecessarily dwell on the conflict instead of focusing on the places where we can connect and doing it in a much higher level of conversation rather than what we see on the news.
So you have your mission, of course, but you have your mission, and we find ourselves in a world that is less traditional than the world that maybe many of us grew up in. One that is less interested in the institution of marriage, perhaps. Fewer people getting married. A lot of people not attending church. Much different than when I was a kid, when everybody went to church. But now a much smaller segment of the society goes to church. So where does an organization like yours fit in all this?
Well, we've never been here because our ideas were popular. So the truth is we're engaged in public policy because we believe that these are the truths that help human flourishing. And we would argue that that's intrinsic of these things, right? So it used to be the case, sure, when we were a more Judeo-Christian rooted country, I would say more people went to church, more people were married, more people had children. But it was not because they're not right things because Christianity says they're right. They're right because they intrinsically work. So for example, just let's look at marriage. People may be choosing to marry less, but it will always be the case that marriage is the safest, best place for men, women, and children. Men are more productive. Women are physically safer. It's a wealth generator. Children, on a whole, we know everybody can't have a mom and a dad for a lifetime. That's not always the case. But on a whole, children that are raised in that married, committed environment are going to succeed in life, much more so, especially when you look at factors of poverty. So those intrinsic truths about our values, like marriage, are always going to be true, even if they're not in vogue. And people, whether they think marriage is the route, they always want security, financial health. We're all always over time pining for the same things. So eventually, because these things are intrinsically true, we circle back and we realize, wow, it doesn't make sense that we're not going about this the right way. It's just unfortunate that we're in a moment where we're sort of misguided about how to get the things that really matter to us. But I believe there will never be a day where 5-year-old little girls are not playing with Barbies and making up weddings. They're not dreaming of their future of some wedding and a lifelong family unit. That is typical, and that is always going to be the case, whether or not it's popular. So we push these truths because they're valuable, because they improve people's lives. And it's the same thing with children. Whether or not having children is in vogue. When as an agrarian society, it was easy to see the literal value of children. You needed a farmhand. And that might not be true today. And it might be the case that people are choosing either fewer children or no children. But interestingly enough, I read a study that talked about how if you ask childless adults, sort of 40 and plus, so you're after your childbearing years, if you did it all over again, would you do the same thing, not have children? Only 24% say they would do it again, meaning they would choose childlessness again. They would actually rather have children. And so these are just fundamental truths. I think God put on our hearts what a blessing children are, and I think that reveals itself even when there are these moments where society's a little bit lost on what really matters.
So you need to, of course, persuade politicians to move the needle here, to change things in society. And I guess the question is if interest groups like yours put all this pressure on politicians to try to persuade them, when they get to the state capitol, are they still persuadable? I mean, once they get there, can you still move them?
This is an increasing challenge, and I will say that the nature of politics is changing, and it is a little bit more alarming in the sense that I think there's more party purity happening than maybe in the past, meaning that the forces that bring you to the table are going to need to be rewarded, or you will not be brought to the table again. And that is an alarming thing when you look at what's driving some of the legislators that are not maybe as conservative as I would like, that don't hold to these values. We have a congressional race that is happening here in Virginia. And I will tell you that when you look at the money, so follow the money, people say, the number, all the commercials for this particular congresswoman are all about how she does not take corporate PAC money. She's not beholden to anybody. But her top donor is Emily's List, the number one abortion industry driver, the PAC that funds the abortion, that funds the candidates for the abortion industry. And and their contribution is double the next contribution. She's going to be beholden to them. We've seen that for the 2 years that she's been in office. And so it is alarming. It is hard to make a dent. I will say years ago, it was about facts and figures. When I first got into this, it was about proving your case analytically. Today, that's not the case. It's really about emotions and story. That's just the reality of the world that we live in. We're in a very image-driven, emotional-driven society. And so now it's a little bit more about helping them see the truths by meeting individuals that have had their lives improved by these different issues, meeting women who are post-abortive and regret it, meeting men, women, and children that have done better because their lives, they've chosen to follow this path of marriage first and then having children. It's all of these truths, and it's presenting it to them maybe a little bit more in a real life example and in a story than it used to be, but it's still powerful. Most importantly, legislators will always have to be reelected by their constituents. So I would argue the most powerful thing any organization that is trying to make a dent in politics on these issues that matter can do is really mobilize the people in their district that stand strongly with you on these values. Help them use their voice. A legislator doesn't listen to me because I have some unique, amazing information. They only listen to our team at the Family Foundation because they know behind us are thousands of people in their district. And if they never hear from those people, they'll stop believing that. But if we really play a facilitation role of helping citizens do a better job of connecting to their legislator, if we teach them who their legislator is and how to email, how to show up when it's important, that's how the needle gets moved. And so that's really what's important in all of this is citizens learning how to be effective. We're not just called to vote. We're called to hold folks accountable and really continue to express our voice and continue to express our values.
And the people in your organization understand the issues that you represent, right? And you represent a lot of key issues, life, of course, marriage, opposition to gambling, expansion, and all of those issues demand a response. And by definition, these issues divide opinion, of course.
Yes.
Here's the big question. Can you, as you've already put it, be decisive without being divisive? You think you're able to do that?
Yes, I think that is incredibly important, right? So these are not issues that people feel mildly about. People typically have very strong opinions because these are issues of passion. They're issues of morality in many cases. And so, yes, and we just look to the model. We think of Jesus as the model. And despite maybe the way he gets rewritten in people's minds, if you look at scripture, he was not always loved. He was not always kind. I think of these lines that he had, like, get behind me, Satan, that was not exactly non-forceful. He had truth, but he had grace. And we're not going to walk that perfectly, but that is the goal. So the goal is not to shrink back from the truth in order to be liked, nor is the goal to be so aggressive with the truth that you lose the heart of the person that you're speaking with. And so our goal is to balance those things. And we think there's plenty of ways to do that. We got to remember that.
What have you learned from some of the people on the other side of the aisle, people who've been in opposition to you? What have you learned, and have you learned to love them better?
Absolutely. I think it's really important to remember that behind every issue are human beings. We should remember that when we email legislators. We should remember that when we're battling opponents in the legislative context in a committee. And when I've gotten to know my opponents, oftentimes in my experience, and this is maybe not universal, but a lot of times they're actually advocating for what they're advocating out of a point of pain. Honestly, I think of our leading opponent on abortion, and when you actually read her story that came out in a newspaper, you realized exactly why she was standing there so advocating out of just a point of pain. And so we need to think of these people as individuals. We need to love them as individuals. And in fact, I think back to early on when I used to engage against the head of the LGBT movement. At the time, this was 20 years ago, 15 years ago, it wasn't that it was as much about the gender confusion issue, the transgender issue. It was much more about the one issue. But what was interesting is we would battle not in a way that we're using ad hominem. We're not attacking each other. We're not name calling. We're not. What we would talk about is there's a Supreme Court definition of what these categories should be. And does LGBT, does that line up with a politically oppressed minority? Do they have any power? Is it an immutable characteristic? And because we had policy-oriented discussions, that allowed, when he decided to leave that movement, he actually walked away. He came to me, and we actually built this beautiful friendship out of that because we hadn't gone down a route that was not about ideas. We had loved him as a human being, and when he decided to walk away from that organization, he felt it was a safe place to come have a conversation. That should be the case anywhere as possible. We're called to be at peace with people whenever possible. Now, the fact that it says whenever possible means it might not always be possible, but it's our job to speak truth and aim for peace.
That's wonderfully said, Victoria. You've talked about the importance of people not just being statesmen and stateswomen and not just politicians. If you could, in 30 seconds or 60 seconds, define it, what would your definition of a statesman be?
I would just say it's the opposite of being politically expedient. It's the opposite of doing things for political gain. It is calling the nation to something higher, calling the people around you to a moral good instead of worrying about the next election, the cash that's coming from the donor, the thing that's going to give you the power. It is doing it for the right reasons. And it is rare and it is hard to see. We know it when we don't see it. Sometimes it's hard to find those gems in there, but that's what we should be striving for, and we should be training candidates that way.
And that's excellent, Victoria. Well, you've got certainly a lot of work ahead of you. You've already compiled a really amazing track record, and grateful for your heart. I love the talk about being a statesman instead of just a politician. It's easy to run for office and to win office. It's a lot harder. It's a lot more challenging to be a statesman. So I really appreciate your definition of that. I hope you'll come back and talk with us soon.
We would love to do that. Anytime we can make it happen, I'd love to chat.
Great. Thanks so much, Victoria Cobb. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Share what you've learned on today's program by first connecting with Joe directly on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Get started at joewatkins.net.
Well, for the past few months, a young musician in the capital city, that's Harrisburg, has launched a simple experiment in kindness. For weeks, he's been standing at a busy intersection in Harrisburg holding signs with messages that sound a lot like something Mr. Rogers might say, not the ones popping up in yards lately. The sign that's been getting him the most attention is, "I value you." Jordan Dandy says he'll be standing at that intersection until November 3rd, but his message has nothing to do with politics. So, Jordan, welcome to State of Independence.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to see you.
Yeah.
This is wonderful. So how'd you come up with the idea to do this? I mean, what caused you to do this? I mean, who would take time out of their life and their schedule to expose themselves to the public, right?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because cars passing by can do anything. They can throw coffee at you. They can, flip you a sign.
Oh, and that's happened. But I mean, so I was in the hospital late August with a random eye infection, but it also was at a time where a hero of mine, Chadwick Boseman, passed away. And so I was listening to an interview that he gave at Howard University, and he was talking about what your purpose looks like and what it means to live out your purpose, even though it might not be where your career is at. And so that kind of just got the wheels turning. So like I'm sitting there in the hospital, and with just how divisive everything seems to be on social media and everything right now, and then Chadwick Boseman dies. And so just with my relationship with God, I felt like he put on my heart to go out and do this random act of kindness and kind of maybe be some hope and a positive thing people are seeing, maybe on the commute to work or going to school or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Now you're a young man, right?
Yes,
you're 27 years old.
Yeah.
And are you from Harrisburg originally?
Yes, sir.
You're
yes.
from Harrisburg.
Yeah.
And tell the audience what you do outside of this random act of kindness you're doing.
I'm a full-time musician,
Right.
which right now isn't much because of lockdowns and such.
Yeah.
But besides this, holding the signs, I'm a drummer at my church. And then my brother and I, we have a band, Dandy. It goes our last name.
Dandy.
Yeah.
It's a great name.
Yeah,
man.
I mean, people don't remember our first names much, which is okay because like everyone's like that.
Right.
But they always remember our last name.
Yeah.
So we're like, okay, we've grown up playing music
What's
together.
the band called again?
Dandy.
Just Dandy?
Yeah, Dandy.
Right,
yeah.
Not Jim Dandy or.
Well, they had the ice cream at Friendly's, so it goes by that. But yeah, so like besides that, just writing music and trying to be as productive as a musician can be with not being able to play many shows and stuff at the moment.
Well, it's really interesting, how God uses us. So often we think of all these grandiose things. I mean, Chadwick Boseman was an awesome and talented actor, and, and he reached so many millions of people through the films that he did.
Yeah, and just a short period as
only had 44 years, I guess, on the planet.
And also on top of having like colon cancer that he hid and still lived such a compassionate as well as impactful life for obviously the world.
But I guess it's taught you in part that one person can make a difference. I mean, people are angry. The campaigns that are going on around the state and the country are divide people.
Yes.
And people have strong opinions for or against one or the other. And a lot of people are angry. And here it is, you show up unannounced one day. Right? People are driving to work or wherever it is they're going. And they see you. They see Jordan holding up a sign. What's the sign say that you hold up?
There's a couple of them. The first one I was holding is, I value you and you're so important.
Right. How'd you come up with those?
I wanted it to be something personal from me, but also not like political.
Right.
Because I was even like, okay, like you matter, but I was like, even like the word like matter could be weird right now.
Right.
But besides a like crazy toxic political climate and everything going on right now, like with things closing down, like the pandemic and everything, like people like depression's up, anxiety's up, and I'm no politician by any means, but I care about people a lot, and it breaks my heart to even just like hear stories and see how like not hopeful everyone, like everyone just.
Can you see it in their faces?
Oh yeah, and so I mean even just having conversations with my friends, like okay, we'll just wait to 2021, like we're just throwing 2020 out the window, and I'm like, man, like what does walking out change look like now? Like what does it actually mean to make a difference, even if it's just with like a bank teller or like the person making your drink at Starbucks? Like what does that look like? And so that's kind of why I'm out there, and I hope just to make at least somebody smile, or like have some moms have talked to me about like I'm talking to my kid on the way to school about like your sign and like what that means, and even like those simple, like that means the world.
So people tell you, they tell you about what they think? I mean, they responded? And
then it's been really positive. I mean, the first couple days and weeks, people thought I was like panhandling, or like some people were like, you need a ride? I'm like, no, I'm just out here.
Right.
And I mean, sometimes like there's a lot of homeless people who come out and will panhandle at the cross of the street from me, and I've gotten to know a lot of their names. Like I'll bring them like coffee and stuff, but I'm not there I was a little worried the first bit of like, oh man, I hope people don't think I'm trying to like get something from them. But then I just kind of let people think what they think, and I don't shoo away the people who are there trying to make money or anything like that. And I hope we have good conversations, and I just hope me being there, if it helps like people maybe be a little happier and give more money to them, like awesome. Like that's good.
But yeah. What a sweetheart. I mean, that's a kind heart. I mean, people are not prone to be generous with their time or kind, nor are they prone to be kind to others.
Okay,
and so I love this. I mean, I love the fact that you've taken it upon yourselves. Nobody told you to do this. You took it upon yourself to do this. You hold these signs up. You could be doing something else, but you're not focused on yourself. You're focused on the people around you, and yet as one person you've been able to make a huge statement. I mean, you've been noticed. You're on this show.
Yeah,
we're talking to you today,
I'm
right?
honored to be here. Exactly.
No, we're honored to have you.
Thank you.
We're honored to have you because I think in God's kingdom, what matters most is your heart. Not your title, not how much money you have, not where you come from, not what you look like, right? Not how society views you, but your heart and how much you love others, the people around you. Yeah. Because if you say you love God who you can't see, then how can it not show with people who you can see?
Yeah.
You see people around you. You see their brokenheartedness, the division that exists, the sadness in so many folks. And out of the love in your heart, you've taken it upon yourself to try to lift them up.
Yeah.
And just a simple sign in the morning saying, I value you.
It's simple, yeah. To be like, oh, you're so brave for being out there. I'm like, yes, it's out of the ordinary, but it can be as simple as just like smiling and saying hi to somebody. Like just just be intentional with caring about somebody, or like even if they're different from you, with all the race stuff and everything going on now. Like I hope my friends who believe different things than me and have different values than me can still see that like I love them, and regardless of where we might disagree, that like I still want the best for their health. I still want them to prosper in like whatever job they have. Like it's such a us versus them in everything right now, where like I feel like people like are missing out on the honor and respect you can still have for somebody across the aisle from you, regardless of what that aisle is.
So in 10 seconds, tell me what happens after November 3rd.
Hopefully more love for people, and I am optimistic with how things are going, regardless of what they may look like.
Outstanding. Thank you so much. We've been talking to Jordan Dandy, and what a wonderful human being he is. Thank you for making time to be with us on State of Independence. I hope that in some way today's show has helped you in your own life to learn how to trust God more deeply, to love your neighbor more fully, just like Jordan does, and to become a bright light in the darkness. As someone made in God's image, I hope you'll let that light shine right where you're at. If you have a minute, drop me a line in the comment box at joewatkins.net. I see every one of them and I'll respond. Special thanks to Victoria Cobb and Jordan Dandy. Until next time, God bless you. Thanks for watching. Is there anybody else doing what you're doing?
I don't know.
Do you know of a single other person?
That's also like one of those things where I hope that me being out there can spark and maybe inspire someone.
Joe Watkins' State of Independence is a production of Lighthouse TV, positively different. Made possible in part because of the support of viewers like you.